Hello, people. So today we're going to be talking about some of the issues that I have observed within my years of experience in this practice. What's wrong with Kung Fu, so to speak. And this is inclusive. I don't separate internal and external styles. All of it to me falls under that same umbrella category of Kung Fu. The only thing that I do separate really is like contemporary and traditional, because just from my own perspective, the traditional stuff is geared more towards self-defense, as it's the original purpose of our practice. But the contemporary stuff to me just seems to be more performative, and I know that's not always the case, but that's just my perspective. And as somebody that's not a practitioner of the contemporary stuff, I would take my opinion on the contemporary stuff with a grain of salt. Okay, so we're going to break this down into three little categories. There is a component of this that magic. There's a component of this that is secrecy. There's a component of that is history, and quantity versus quantity. Apologies. Quality versus quantity. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the magical component, or like myths and legends and things like that. So we can kind of see this here. And if you watch this video, there's a shit ton of supporters for these kinds of people. And it's like, I can understand it because people are so enthralled by magic and energy and all these metaphysical type things that, in my opinion, they don't have a place in martial arts. And I personally just don't believe that it's true or real. I think it's all fantasy, and it's a good way to manipulate people into believing that you as an instructor are worth learning from. And more often than not, these kinds of people don't have students that can do the things that they do, right? I'm putting my finger here and like twisting it, or I'm doing a magic push, or I'm waving my hand over somebody and they perish, or they're awkwardly jumping away in a way that doesn't make any kind of sense. And it's like, that's not real life, right? If I'm going to do a takedown, if I'm going to throw a punch, if I'm going to push, it's not going to disobey the laws of physics, right? If I am pushing somebody forward, why are they jumping up? Like, why does it look like they've been shocked? And it's like, oh, because somebody's projecting their chi or whatever. Chi is very real, but it's not magic. Chi is simply just energy, right? Whenever I've heard someone say, yes, I'm projecting my chi, and I've seen it, it's never like a Hadouken type deal. It's more of a exertion of force. It's the difference between like a jab and like a solid uppercut, right? If I'm throwing an uppercut, I'm committing to it 110%. That, in my opinion, is putting chi into my punch, right? I'm connecting with my body. I'm exerting force and directing all that force into my fist, and from my fist into my target. And when I say that, I'm not saying I'm concentrating on the ground and building my chi from my pressure points in my foot and going from up my leg into my dantian and into my fist and breaking my opponent's rib cage with my chi. No. What I'm saying is really kinetic linking. I'm connecting my whole body, right? From my feet down, I'm connected, I'm stable on the ground, I'm pushing up, I'm connecting it with my waist and driving through. And that is using chi. And then there's that argument of like, oh, fa jing, and anytime I see it, it just looks like someone found the magical power of punching, like with strength behind it. They're not punching straight there, putting something behind it, and they're like, oh, it's explosive energy. You're projecting your chi. And to me, that's just like, no, you're just punching with intention. You're doing these movements in the air, yes, but you're just putting force behind it, and it looks super explosive in Tai Chi, and it looks like you're doing something significantly different and out there. But you have to understand there's a higher degree of contrast with Tai Chi versus any other martial art, really, because Tai Chi is so soft and flowy, and I'm going to say poetic in its aesthetic appeal. So when they have movements that are, that are more power based, and you see them shaking and they have this tension and strength, it shows so much more because of that contrast, and it is just a greater sense of intention into that one movement. It's not magic. It's not, I'm, channeling my energy and putting my chi into my fist and, blowing somebody's organs up with my magical powers. So we have to kind of take a more realistic approach to that understanding, and it's like, oh, it's not Kung Fu if you don't have this explosive chi. It's like, it's just power. It's just exerting power with intention. It's not staying within this box. It's not just excessive amounts of speed. So it's, and then it's like, oh, but you have to learn when to use, you have to time it. Well, yeah, that goes for everything. It's not like I'm concentrating on my energy and building and, no, it's not that. I mean, in a technical sense, yes, that's exactly what it is, but it's not in that energetic, metaphysical, esoteric kind of way. It's just intention, and that's all psychological, really. And then there's other like magical elements of like dimmak and things like that, and that also goes into like legends and history, right? Because it's so and so was able to do it. He did this one move and it killed somebody. Any kind of pressure points that I've learned, like here or here, and like the couple in the forearm and the wrist and the hand and the clavicle and the I don't really see the function. The ones in the armpit, like, I don't really see the use in knowing them. It's kind of like fun facts that, well, I wouldn't even call it facts. It's more like fun pseudoscience, and that, you can say, oh, you strike here, you might knock somebody out. Oh, you strike here, you might knock somebody out. But like, the correlation between that being a pressure point and that just being an area where you can rattle somebody's brain is different, right? I feel like it's more of a correlation, not equating to causation. You're hitting a softer spot in the body, but you're not necessarily hitting this one point with accuracy and it's magically knocking somebody out. You're hitting somebody in a vulnerable spot that's going to cause a reaction in their body that's going to result in a very specific outcome. If I get to land a clean, committed, full power shot on somebody's jaw, be it here, odds are it might put somebody down. It's not really relative to pressure points, though. If I hit somebody here, if I hit somebody real tight here, in the chest upward, if I hit somebody in the softer lower rib cage, I'm not aiming for these pressure points, right? Like right here, oh yes, this is for this pressure point. It's not the pressure point, it's just really how your body is structured, right? I'm not blocking off chi, I'm not attacking your meridians or anything like that. I don't really even think any of that is doable or exists. I just believe that there are parts in our body that are more susceptible to cause an intended reaction. If I kick the shit out of somebody's lower rib cage, odds are I'm going to crack their rib cage. They're going to go down. If I punch somebody real hard here, it's a softer spot of the body. You can feel that little dip here. It's going to do more damage. Getting hit in the solar plexus sucks. Getting hit anywhere in this area sucks. So it's going to cause a reaction. In my experience, I have never been hit in a pressure point, even with intention, that has caused me to go down. There's like one pressure point here that when you press into it, it hurts like a bitch. I don't really know why. Maybe there's a bundle of nerves here. Maybe it's the way that it separates the muscle groups. But it hurts. But to be able to do that in a self-defense situation is unrealistic. And, because the time somebody grabs my arm and squeezes and tries to find that one specific spot, I'm just going to use my other hand or kick the shit out of them. So it's like, people kind of perpetuate this idea of like, oh yes, he knows the killing hands. And then here's this video. I love this documentary because I think it's just really funny the way that they like did the voiceover, like it's an old kung fu movie. Like, if this master deems somebody worthy of learning killing hands, they don't need to learn it because they're so skilled that they don't need it. And it's like a cop out to me. It's like A, he doesn't know it, and B, it's just like a cool thing to say, right? Oh, I can. You're so ready to learn it, but you don't need it. And it's like, why even put that in there? If you're not gonna teach it, why claim it exists? Why claim that you know it? And then, if it does exist, wouldn't you want to teach it so it can survive, right? Because isn't that the purpose of having disciples and all this stuff, so that you can teach all of these techniques, so that they can pass it on, this practice can survive. But I have never seen anybody effectively using any of this outside the realm of like these key masters that are it's kung fu movie, it's cool because it's not real. When I'm watching a movie, a part of the enjoyment is that fantasy, but sometimes that fantasy gets warped, or sometimes people believe that history is influencing these movies. Like General Kwan, like his whole story is so bizarre and out there that it's this thing where people are mixing legend and history and coming to these conclusions that just aren't founded in reality. Was General Kwan probably an actual person? Absolutely. But a lot of the things that they claim he could do are just bizarre. Handling a 200-pound Kwon Do, it doesn't serve a purpose. And on horseback. I mean, A, poor horse. But B, why do I need a 200-pound Kwon Do? So you can ride through and kill people. The speed that you have to be able to maneuver that and not get murdered, you have to have the power of God and anime on your side, because it doesn't work that way. And we also have to take a look at history, because history will tell you what the definition of things are. Nowadays, people take taichi to mean, supreme ultimate fist, taichi chuan. And that means that it's the best. That's just not accurate. Taichi Chuan Supreme Ultimate Fist, the Supreme Ultimate is more reflective of the Tao and Taoism. It's not even about fighting. It's not about, oh yes, this is the best fighting system. This is a method to connect with your body, to find your way, to find the way, to find the Tao. That is part of the practice. Which is why it is such an it is an internal system. It is more about connection with the world, with yourself, than it is about fighting. So, living off of historical accounts is also a thing. So, we don't have any type of footage that's going to dictate or state that, yes, this person did this and this person did that, and having accurate accounts. We have accounts from people that have tried to glorify their history, or won or accomplished something without any way to prove it. And we can't judge a martial art by history. We have to judge a martial art by what's tangible. So we have to kind of look at it from a different lens, right? There are stories that I definitely like to tell, like the story of the praying mantis guy, because he sucked. Truly. You look up the story, the dude sucked. He got beat by his Shaolin brothers all the time. And he had to go out and seek outside sources and learn from more people and craft his own style. And it's like taking from outside sources, building his own thing, taking what he learned from the Lohan, and building is so realistic because it's kind of like my experience, right? Was I one of the better proponents of understanding, teaching, and sparring and all that stuff at my old dojo? Sure. But it's one thing to be the best in your dojo and another thing to be good outside of your dojo. So I had to go outside and learn from my Hungar Sifu, learn from, my brother, learn from people that have experience in other martial arts, or even online, taking other people's perspectives and applying it to my practice. That's real. That is how martial arts should be progressing. And this, to me, is the value of looking at the history of the style, not to harp and thrive off of historical accounts of what my masters did or my grandmasters did, but to look at how things changed, how things developed. The last thing we're going to talk about is quantity versus quality. And with that comes my critique on one of my great grandmasters. Rest up, dude, but homeboy apparently had like 300 forms. And, I mean, gotta catch them all, Pokemon, I guess, but I don't see the value in that. I understand wanting a taste of a system, right? I can understand wanting to learn more and, kind of following along the lines of like MMA, right? You get a little bit of every system, combine it together, and you have what you have. But for me, that's just too much. And this is coming from somebody that learned closer to 70 forms. I I maybe actually care about like 5 of them. I maintain maybe 10 to 15 of them. And the reason for the maintenance is for training purposes. So I'll practice my like Baxiolum forms for the sake of flexibility, for the sake of maintaining my kicks, because I'm not so amassing 300 forms just feels like a waste of my time, right? How good can you really get? It's like me trying to learn every single style of karate, every single style of kung fu, every single style of this, that, and the other. And it's like I'm gonna get good at nothing. I'm gonna have knowledge, a lot of knowledge that I might be able to share, but at the end of the day, I'm not really getting good at anything. I'm not really building a solid understanding of everything, which was my problem with my old school. It was all about quantity and not quality. And what I mean by that is that every system exists for a reason. There were either perceived deficits, there were either areas where they thought they could grow and develop, and so they branched off and created their own systems. I want to learn those theories. I want to understand the concept and draw my own conclusions. I don't want to have to figure it out. I don't want to have to learn 50 forms and then be told, hey, go figure it out. I learned the Hungar system in as much detail as I could at the time, and I know that I still have a lot to learn, but having an instructor who took a very realistic approach, who sat down and spoke to me about theory and understanding why certain moves are performed a certain way, why certain moves are modified, why certain movements are this, that, and the other, and it helped me to understand the difference between real life, tradition, fantasy, and the true understanding of the practice. I can't say that I had that understanding with styles like Northern Sheldon or even Praying Mantis for that matter. I had to figure that out because that was how I was taught. I was taught movement, right? I learned the movements, I learned the form, then it was like, okay, figure it out. Right, Shaolin is a defensive system. We'll get like a outline idea of the system. Shaolin's a defensive system. They use a lot of circles to redirect and do this and do that. Okay, sure. But what does all that really mean? What is the concept? What is the theory? What is the objective of each form? Right? Every form is supposed to communicate an idea or several ideas. What is the idea that it's trying to communicate to me? And then if that idea can be taught and communicated to the student can then not figure it out, but figure out how to develop it further, which should be the end goal of martial arts, should it not? We should not stay stagnant, right? We should flow like the river, be water, that kind of deal. So, with that, we can build on it, develop the practice further. This is why we have so many styles, but this is also why so many styles suck, because we're so hell-bent on maintaining these systems and teaching them and passing them down as they are instead of trying to build them and improve upon them. To build a quality understanding of the practice, what does it really take, right? It takes an understanding of all the elements, right? We have to take a look at our system's history. We don't need to know like who did what, when, where, why, and how, but understanding its origins, right? Why does this style exist? What is it influenced by? And what was the predominating philosophy of that time frame, right? So for a style like Hungar, we have to take into account Shaolin, right? Because it is a style that is heavily influenced by Shaolin. Beyond that, we know that Hungar is very much rooted in that concept of tiger and crane, of balance. Beyond that, we also have to see how the movements are performed, right? Taking all of those things into account, we can develop a finer understanding of the system and learn how to better apply it. And it's hard too because nobody wants to get hurt. Not too many people like getting punched in the mouth. So we sometimes, unfortunately, take these ideas and concepts and don't run with it because we have the understanding now. We're good, right? No. If we have the understanding, now is the time to make sure that understanding makes sense. Figure it out to me is, yes, I've given you these concepts, I've given you these ideas, I've given you these techniques. Now apply them, right? Take them into sparring. Or even then, concept and theory can be applied to real life, You don't have to use it in fighting. For example, the concept of redirection, of rerouting, of not taking force, of redirecting force. We can apply that to everything, right? When people come at us headstrong, in arguments or in any kind of social setting, or we are with our kids, right? If our children are being aggressive and yelling at us and giving an attitude, we can either scold and yell and push back and be aggressive instead of being assertive and controlled. Yes, we're going to have to receive some of that force, but we can direct it a different way. We can choose a more positive outcome instead of fighting fire with fire. We can choose to de-escalate a situation instead of escalate it further. And that is the most important part of the traditional martial arts, is how it can apply to real life. And that is why I'm so focused on identifying the problem, because it is not translating for a lot of people. A lot of people are learning all of this stuff and don't know how to use it. I've had peers and students at the old McDojo come and say, hey, I left the school because at one point in time somebody accosted me and I felt scared. I didn't feel confident in doing in using my stuff to defend myself, because I've never had that live resistance training, because we never drilled what to do when somebody pulls a knife on you, because we never fought, because so many of these reasons. And I'm like, what can I say? You're right. The old McDojo rarely did any of those things, if we ever did any of those things. And if we did, there was always an element of bullshit. And you can watch my last video to figure out some of that stuff. But it's like, perpetuating fantasy is only going to create conflict long term. We all have to start approaching it with an open mind, and instead of being resistant to the thought of change, we should embrace it. And I know that change is very difficult for some of us, but we can't grow without change. We can't adapt. We have nothing to improve upon if we're so committed to this mindset of this is the way. The old method is the right method. I don't believe that. I believe that the old method is a good platform to start. I believe that the old method is a good means of learning and developing a rudimentary understanding of the practice and how and why it was the way it was. But what value is that if we don't try to elaborate, expand, and grow? And with that, I'm going to close this up. So let's recap. Right, we've established that some of the problems with this practice are just delusional people or magical understandings of this practice, when martial arts should not be looked at with this lens of fiction and a lack of tangibility. Beyond that, this whole quality versus quantity argument. Sure, you can amass an incredible amount of forms and content, but what is that really worth? Do you truly understand any of those systems that you've learned? Or do you just have an outline? Or do you just have pure movement? Living off of historical accounts. And, we hear stories about our grandmasters, and we hear stories about the old masters from hundreds of years ago doing all of these incredible things. Those stories don't really serve us anymore. They're good templates for us to feel good about our practice and know that at some point in time, at least on paper, things were efficient, functional, and there was no need to question it. But we're not back there anymore. We're today. And we have to work with what we got. And what we got now, for the most part, is wonky. And perhaps I'm wrong in saying for the most part, but when I look at explanations of application for movements and forms and things like that, most of it just feels rooted in one-step movements or theory that is unfounded or just fantasy, right? We look at taichi dudes like Adam Eisner trying to explain how to use these movements, and it's just a joke, really. And then we see older masters that are, Hungar masters or praying mantis dudes trying to explain their technique, and it looks good on paper, but then when you really analyze it, you're going to look at it and say, okay, yes, they're saying, if somebody punches here, and then they punch again, and it's like there is a lack of realism here because we're still operating from a box. And we need to break free from that, right? Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to come, you block and strike, now I'm going to block. And, keeping like this structured format. And I think that's okay to drill every now and again, but I don't think that should be the foundation of your understanding of how to apply your Kung Fu for combat. Which that seems to be the case for a lot of us, unfortunately. Take the time to analyze your practice, because at the end of the day, we can't change our teachers as individuals. And what I mean by that is, yes, we can go to another dojo, but we can't change the person that they are. We can't change their understanding. So we can choose to do one of two things: leave with our practice intact, or leave and find another practice. If we leave with our practice intact, then we can choose to keep it as just an art form, or we can choose to expand on it and try to grow. With that said, next week we're going to be talking about the value of Kung Fu. Is it worth practicing? And clearly the answer is yes, but why and how? And if I have had a whole video dedicated to analyzing the problems and having identified problems in the past and having videos about my past experience, what value could there really be for this practice? And granted, with all the things I've had to say, these are just honest and candid conversations, because we need to have those from time to time. We need to be realistic with our practice and what we do it for. And that's really what this next video is going to be about. Why do we practice this? What is the value of practicing this? How can it benefit us? Even outside the realm of self-defense and fighting, because I feel like sometimes we get so drawn into that idea, because it's one of the biggest problems with our practice is that the martial component is often fantasized or non-existent. But there is still so much more that this practice can offer us, and we just have to be willing to be realistic, be patient, and look inward. So with that said, I hope that this has helped you to see some things with this practice and understand that this practice is a lot of things, and one of those many things is flawed. And if we cannot look inside those flaws, pick it apart, and make decisions to expand on it, build on it, change, adapt, improve, this is not going to get us very far, especially as a martial art. So, with that said, I'll see you next week. Take care.